this is sort of the proof of it. He has the least qualified people on national security in American history.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had David Cay Johnston. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He's a professor. He's also an author on an array of books about Donald Trump. We've spoken to him about this bombshell Signal group chat that journalist Jeff Goldberg was added into. So we've spoken to him about the national security risks, what the state of security is like in the United States, and kind of the response from the White House. They said it happened, but then said no chat about war plans were involved. So all that today, we discuss kind of the backlash. Who needs to be fired? Who needs to be taking accountability? How will Donald Trump react to this? So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube. David Cay Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and of course, author of an array of books on Donald Trump. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you again, Maddie.
Well, it's good timing that you're on the show, David, because, God, you and I have a lot to discuss. The White House is likely in overdrive after the news that broke last night. Atlantic journalist Jeff Goldberg basically revealing that he was accidentally added into a Signal group chat, which is, of course, the commercial messaging app, which included Pete Hegseth, Department of Defense, Vice President JD Vance, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, along with other top senior government officials, quite literally not only talking about government policy, but talking about plans for war and bombing Houthis in Yemen. What was your immediate reaction when you read this story?
This is real amateur hour. That's exactly was my thought. Donald Trump used to say, only hire the best people. And it's just never been true. And this is sort of the proof of it. He has the least qualified people on national security in American history. And what Pete Hegseth is trying to do now, Maddie, is deny this. He's saying, we didn't discuss war plans. The authenticity of what Jeffrey Goldberg has already been established by none other than the White House. If this had happened under any non-Trump administration, there'd be wholesale firings. There would be the Justice Department engaging in criminal investigations, because you don't use commercial services like the one they did, or WhatsApp, or others, when the U.S. government has spent a fortune developing these very heavily encrypted ways for national security people to communicate with one another.
Would you ever think that in any discussion, government discussion, David, it would be done in a group chat, whether it's iMessage, WhatsApp, whatever it may be? Is there any scenario that you can imagine this would be done in a group chat?
Well, I can see where people in different places who haven't been able to all get to either the Situation Room or the Pentagon facility known as the Tank would communicate. But each of these people has in their office and in their home something called a SCIF, a secure facility that cannot be penetrated, as best we know, by any outside electromagnetic force. And you go into your SCIF, and that's how you communicate, and then you communicate over these super secure systems that the U.S. government has spent a fortune developing. Anybody who's using, say, WhatsApp or Signal and thinks that it's secure, well, it's secure from you and me. It's secure from probably high school hackers. But if a foreign government wants to read your WhatsApp or Signal messages, they're going to be able to do that. It's not that much encryption.
Hey, I want to read out this. You mentioned before that Pete Hegseth, he was in an interview, kind of a bit of a doorstop interview, and he was basically denying. He was throwing attacks on the journalist Jeff Goldberg, basically calling him deceitful and saying he was not really a journalist. All that stuff, which was funny because that video went up, but then, of course, you saw Twitter community notes basically calling him misleading and writing various We saw the White House confirm it. We saw House Speaker Mike Johnson confirm it, and various sources confirming this was true, the FBI. But I want to read out this tweet from Caroline Levitt, the press secretary. I thought this was absolutely bizarre. She said, here are the facts about the latest story. Now, she said that he was a sensationalist journalist. She said, number one, no war plans were discussed. Number two, no classified material was sent to the thread. Number three, the White House counsel's office has provided guidance on a number of different platforms for President Trump's top officials to communicate as safely and efficiently as possible. Now, she, of course, said that the National Security Council was looking into this. The White House was looking into this. The replies from this tweet were quite hilarious. You had Brian Krastenstein saying, what spin was there? He received texts about secret plans to bomb Yemen and then reported on it. It sounds like you guys are the ones trying to spin this. What is your response to the White House, David? One of them confirms it, and then the press secretary comes out and says no war plans were discussed.
So the smart strategy when you get caught in a mess like this is to own up to it and say, it won't happen again, and go on. Instead, they've extended the story now to a second day, and it may well to a third, because these people are amateurs at doing this. Ms. Levitt, the White House press secretary, who's all of, I think, 27 years old, just doesn't have the depth of experience in how to deal with stories like this. The suggestion that the Atlantic magazine is a sensationalist is hilarious. It is a highbrow intellectual publication, maybe intelligentsia level publication that I've been reading since I was 12, and I started reading it because I wanted to understand how adults, communicate in the world. And it's as sober as The Economist in London. So this is just absurd, and it shows that these people are simply not qualified, and they don't understand matters of national security. Now, let's remember, Donald Trump once in the dining room of Mar-a-Lago with all sorts of people sitting around was openly discussing national security secrets in the past. And that's because Donald and the people around him really don't understand issues of national security. And I say this, by the way, as somebody who's exposed foreign agents and spies.
It's kind of concerning, though, when you read those receipts, David, when you see him following along, Jeff Goldberg following along, where they said that they are going to instruct the militants to start bombing Yemen. And then not long after, the journalist is sitting in his car waiting for it to happen. I think he said at 12:44 or something like that, waiting for the bombings to happen. And then at the time that they said it would happen, the Pentagon does release a statement saying it has happened. It's terrifying stuff, David, that intricacies, that level of intelligence, that level of sensitive information he could follow along with it.
Right. Well, and think about this. The only reason we know about this is that for whatever reason, Jeffrey Goldberg was added to this group. He should not have been in that group. He could not have joined the group. So somebody in the administration, probably mistyping a name or through inadvertence, added him to this list. But if it weren't for that, we wouldn't know that they were using insecure ways to communicate things like this. And you can be sure that the intelligence services in Beijing, North Korea, Iran, etc., are all, gleefully watching this and going, boy, what else is readily available? One of the reasons the Ukrainians have done remarkably well in the war with Russia is that the Russians don't have secure communications, and they could listen in not only when soldiers were calling home to mama or their girlfriend on their cell phones, but they could listen in when generals in the field were calling Moscow for directions.
It is terrifying stuff, but the reports kind of indicate that National Security Mike Waltz was the one to add Goldberg in. So we've got Mike Waltz in the chat. We've got
someone on his staff. I mean, he may not have actually.
Someone on his staff, of course. That person will probably be reprimanded for that. So you've got Mike Waltz, you've got Vice President JD Vance, and you've got Pete Hegseth, someone who was controversially put in the role as a Defense Secretary. David, who needs firing is my question.
Well, in a normal administration, there would be a wholesale house cleaning here. And Pete Hegseth and Waltz would be the first to go. But that's not going to happen here. This is an administration, that has moved very rapidly to remove all sources of accountability. So Pam Bondi, there's no way that she would prosecute in any matter in this or even run a grand jury investigation unless it was for show. The inspector generals, 19 of them throughout the U.S. government, have been removed. Those are the in-house watchdogs who've proven very effective over the last almost 50 years in rooting out, poor management, fraud, abuse, waste. So things are just going to continue with this group of amateurs who just don't know what they're doing and don't listen to outsiders. Instead of saying, gee, this is terrible, we'll do better, they adopted the Trump approach. Didn't happen, it's a lie, you made that up, fake news, we are perfect.
Well, let me rephrase that, David. Should they be fired?
Oh, absolutely, they should be fired. Certainly, Mike Walls and Hegseth should absolutely be replaced, and they should be replaced by people who have a deep experience and know what they're doing. Let's remember that while Hegseth was in the military, he was a junior officer. He was a captain when he left, if my memory is correct.
But David, this is, yes, that is correct. A national security advisor and the head of the defense are very pivotal roles in this, but this is the vice president who is listing, responding, saying various slanderous things about European allies. I'm just kind of confused. This is the second most important job in the country, and he can't even look at a group chat and wonder, like, who are these people involved in this very sensitive information that's being spoken about on a group chat? I mean, this is the vice president.
Well, I don't think it's the second most important job. It's like being the second son of the king or the queen. You're the spare heir. But JD Vance hopes very much that he will become president of the United States, and a pretty good shot at it, given the number of vice presidents who become presidents. But he has no experience here either, and he has proven himself to be a man of incredibly flexible morals. He used to say Donald Trump was, an absolutely unqualified and crazy person, and now he talks about him as if he's, the greatest president ever. In fact, I think he's used that exact phrase. So you're dealing with people who don't have the proper experience and, more importantly, have not surrounded themselves with the people who can do that. Really good leaders put around themselves advisors who are deeply experienced and who have enough backbone to say, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary of Defense, no, you don't want to do that, and here's why. They surround themselves with sycophants and yes-men, and that always leads to getting into trouble because you're not listening to the advice you need to hear. You're listening to the advice you want to hear.
Politico was reporting, though, David, that the only person that could kind of face some sort of accountability, some sort of a punishment for this would be Mike Waltz, and the only way that he would either step down, be forced to step down, or he would be fired, would be if Donald Trump evaluates the situation that it's going to affect his reputation, it's going to affect the way people view him. So is that your understanding, that that's the only person that could face punishment, but that's the only way in which he would?
Maddie, from 37 years of knowing and covering Donald, it's a one-way street when it comes to loyalty. And as soon as Donald perceives that your continued presence is a threat to him, he'll push you onto your sword. And he may well make one of these people the sacrificial example, but not unless he absolutely feels he has to. And that'll depend on how this story develops over the next few days. And by their actions, they've extended the life of this story that they could have tamped down a lot by just being forthright and telling the truth. And by the way, if you're a European leader, you're a supposed ally of the United States, these conversations are not going to be shocking to you because you know what these people think. But to the public, it should get a lot more attention about the utter disrespect with which we are holding the leaders of other sovereign nations, especially nations allied with us.
Well, that's actually my next question, David. I want to read out some of these messages because do you have the VP, and you have Pete Hegseth saying stuff like, I hate bailing out Europe again. I fully share your loathing of Europe. It's freeloading. It's pathetic. Now, how do you think Americans are looking at this blatant attack, this blatant name calling, this disrespectful language when it comes to Europe? We have seen for the past few months, it's clear as day that the VP isn't the biggest fan of Europe. He isn't the biggest fan of the way in which the US has helped out the allyship. He's not the biggest fan of it. But the fact that he's texting on such a easy thread, clearly, able to add anyone in, it is quite disrespectful to long-standing allies,
The vast majority of Americans aren't going to care, and they're not going to pay attention. I mean, they may get the issue that, we somehow let out some information about dropping some bombs, but they're not going to care. For a long time, only 1 in 6 Americans had a passport. Now we're finally up to half of Americans have a passport. Americans are raised with this idea that we're unique and special. And a lot of American newspapers, when we had lots of foreign correspondents all around the world, their stories would tell you what the CIA station chief or the ambassador or the ambassador's staff from America thought about the foreign post they were in, not what that government or other governments that had people posted there thought. So you have to understand that unlike the cosmopolitan kind of life people live in Europe and cross borders and experience different cultures, in the United States, there's this internal look, and everybody else should go along with whatever we want to do. There are plenty of people who think deeply about these issues, but they're a minority of the public, and not a great minority, probably a third or so, maybe at most 40%.
That is a good point, because and that's the constituents that obviously Donald Trump got on his side in the 2016 election. David, a lot of those Americans that kind of felt, I guess, unseen and unheard. But what do you think would have been the general feeling at the White House when this article dropped last night in London time? Do you think that they would have been in meltdown?
No, I think they would have immediately gone into defense mode. How do we turn this into yet another attack on the enemy of the people, which is what Trump and his folks call journalists, especially journalists who actually check and cross-check as opposed to those who simply act as scribes to the official version of events. But you don't have in the White House communications office and press team people who've been through a lot of things like this, have scars from doing so, have learned from these mistakes. I mean, these really are amateurs, and this is no place for amateurs. There's nothing wrong with being an amateur, a word that when originally conceived was a term of praise. It meant you were very serious about something, but in today's world, of course, we use it as the opposite of professional.
Especially in a high-profile cabinet position. David, Senator Mark Kelly, Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, I should say, he's been a bit of a staunch, Trump critic, and he tweeted this today. He goes, "There is a room in the building and secure systems where you are supposed to have these discussions. Signal ain't it. Your recklessness puts the lives of those pilots at risk. You got lucky. Time to really reevaluate the way you're doing things." Did these senior members, these people involved in this group chat, did they violate the Espionage Act?
I think you can make a case that they did so. The problem is that the concept of the 1917 Espionage Act suggests that you are actively working on behalf of a foreign power or against the interests of the United States. They weren't doing this. This is a matter of sloppiness and unprofessionalism. Beyond the fact that Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's totally in Donald Trump's pocket, would never take any action here, I don't think that's what that act was meant to do, and I think we should be very cautious about it. Donald Trump wants to use the Espionage Act against journalists who publish things he doesn't like, and I expect you're going to see a prosecution. I think they're just waiting for the right case to do so. But technically you could make it apply here, and I say this as someone who taught law for many years, still does teach law. This is not an appropriate use of that act. This is really an administrative problem where we expect the executive branch to conduct itself with deep regard for national security interests and doing things in a way that protects people and protects people like the fighter pilots who went and dropped these bombs.
Exactly. Those, and they were put at a risk, David, but do you see, I mean, you mentioned this at the start of the interview, but do you see any kind of repercussions at all, or do you really do see the White House kind of sweeping this under the rug?
Well, that is going to depend a lot on what happens over the next few days. Hegseth trying to deny this happened at all certainly doesn't help him. The Democrats very much want to have hearings on this, but they're minorities. Now, they can hold unofficial hearings on their own. The Republicans did that when they were in the minority. And then there'll be the question of how much clamor is there for somebody to be removed. Donald Trump's, of course, response to this, of course, was just classic Donald. I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry. I have the greatest information network in the world. We spend over $100 billion a year to produce reports just for you on national security, but I don't know anything. And sadly, with a lot of people, that's a credible answer, even though it shouldn't be.
Do you know who would be laughing or crying? Is Hillary Clinton, David.
Yes.
How do you think she's feeling right now?
Well, vindicated, I suspect. You know, the funny thing, Hillary Clinton was gone after for using a private email server, although Colin Powell had been a general, used one, and Secretary of State, and Madeleine Albright and others. And the FBI admitted that they couldn't find any evidence that Hillary Clinton's email server in her home had been hacked, because when you hack something, you leave digital footprints. But the State Department email had been hacked repeatedly by hostile foreign powers. So the irony is, you know, she did something that's outside the rules, like some of her predecessors, but nobody apparently got access to her stuff, and yet she's pilloried for the use of her private email.
Her tweet saying, "Are you kidding me?" was quite hilarious to watch as someone who kind of covered that entire back and forth between the two. But David, I want to read out a few things that have happened as of late that I think are kind of piling onto the situation when it comes to security. So 3 weeks ago, we had Pete Hegseth order this halt in all offensive cyber operations against Russia. So a lot of backlash when it comes to that, and the fact that they're basically not going to look into if Russia is hacking, that kind of thing. So then the White House last week raced to release these JFK files. In doing so, they accidentally published around 200 individuals' social security numbers, which is, of course, illegal. So you've got that breach in confidentiality there. And now we have the VP, the Defense Secretary, the National Security Advisor in a group chat talking about plans to bomb Yemen. So my question is, what is the state of the United States security right now?
Terrible, absolutely terrible. In fact, I'm teaching a class on opinion writing, persuasive writing, and I had my students write about this very issue of stopping cyber combat, basically, with the Russians. And, young as students are and inexperienced, they immediately were able to all perceive, yeah, this is not a good thing. Why in the world would we do this? The Pentagon, for example, has tens of thousands of efforts every day to penetrate, some of it by, high school kids goofing off, and some of it very serious efforts by hostile foreign powers. And in all of this, what you're seeing is no understanding of that we live in a dangerous world, like it or not, and that we have national security interests that matter. And you're seeing the same thing play out with Kash Patel moving against a number of high-level FBI people who are deeply expert in counterintelligence, who have protected Americans from many, many attacks they're never going to hear about by intercepting and disrupting them in various ways or making them ineffective. So what you have is an administration here that simply does not understand the sophisticated issues of geopolitics, geomilitarism, and diplomacy. And this is very bad for the national security of the U.S. And sooner or later, something will happen as a result of that. It may not be dramatic. It may not be something that captures everyone's attention like Osama bin Laden did with 9/11, where he, picked targets that would resonate and deeply disturb people. But there are going to be negative consequences of this sooner or later, and there are no doubt a number of people on the inside trying to get the Trump appointees and Donald Trump himself to be serious about national security, and in doing so, risking their positions.
Yeah, and I think that this kind of played the last few things, especially negotiations between Trump and Putin. It's played into that idea that maybe Donald Trump's cabinet picks were not smart enough because there was so much concern over whether Pete Hegseth had the experience. But of course, Steve Witkoff, who has no experience working in government, working in military, he has a real estate background. So I think he couldn't name a few important factors about the war in meetings this week. So.
Well, Maddie, there's an almost Marxist-Leninist sort of approach in the Trump people. Think about the Cultural Revolution by Mao Zedong in the mid-1960s, where people who were qualified were humiliated in public. Professors, highly educated diplomats and others, they were humiliated in public. And that's one of the ways that a regime using the Marxist-Leninist playbook would try to seize power and be unaccountable. And that's one of Donald's key goals here, is he does not want to be held to account, right to the point where he has said many times it should be against the law to write or report anything about him that he doesn't approve of.
Oh God, and I don't know if he's going to have any luck with that, if the first 2 months of his administration says anything. But David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report, and your analysis was appreciated as always.
Well, thank you for having me again, Maddie.